Makahanya haramita shingyo Genji boza gyojin hanya haramita jishoken gon gai gudo isai gu yaku shari shiki fui gu fui.
Master Rinzai said, "If you know that fundamentally there is nothing to seek, you have settled your affairs. But because you have little faith, you run about agitatedly, seeking your head which you think you have lost. You cannot stop yourself." This being the month of January and the new year, on the 10th of this month is the commemoration of the death anniversary of Rinzai Gigen, Master Rinzai Gigen, who died 866 AD in China. His Chinese name is Linchi Rinzai, being the Japanese rendition. And his memorial being this month, thought it would be a good idea to start off with this quote from Master Rinzai. Master Rinzai himself, of course, was a pupil of Obaku, and we've told that story before. About the encounter between Obaku and Rinzai, but just sufficient to say that he had a very brief teaching life, no more than 10 years, and yet despite that, his is one of the two remaining schools of Zen that have survived since those times. So he's a very important figure, and the other thing to say about Rinzai is that his style is very direct, and very much to the point. And even though these words are well over 1,000 years old, they're still very pertinent today. And yet, despite the fact that he was very much to the point, he had an early grounding in Tendai Buddhism, one of the esoteric tantric schools of Buddhism in China. And he was thoroughly versed in all the Buddha's teachings, and you can tell this from the Rinzai Roku, the record of Rinzai, which is the collection of his teachings made by his disciples of what Master Rinzai said and taught, and some of the anecdotes. He often refers to the teachings, which is useful for us because here in the West we're not so familiar with the teachings of the Buddha, and often feel, particularly in Zen, because of that famous phrase that's attributed to, or verse that's attributed to Bodhidharma, special transmission outside the teachings, not dependent on words and phrases, that we sometimes think we can do away with the teachings. But really, to understand Zen, to study Zen and to practice Zen, we need to have a thorough grounding in the Buddha's teachings. What Bodhidharma and what Master Rinzai warn against is becoming dependent upon them, or substituting reading and study for the actual implementation or practice of those teachings, which is very important. So here in this particular quote, Master Rinzai says, "If you know that fundamentally there is nothing to seek." Now that phrase, "nothing to seek," is one of the favourites of Master Rinzai. He has a number of phrases that he's very keen on, that he uses throughout all his teachings, and he often refers to the one who has nothing further to seek, or the independent man of the way, or we'll just use that phrase when you realise that there's nothing further to seek. You have settled your affairs, he says here. And the reason that he uses this is because obviously this ties in with the Buddha's teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Suffering I teach and the way out of suffering, where the Buddha diagnosed that human condition and called it dukkha. And dukkha, which is often translated into English as suffering, and it certainly means that. I mean disease and pain and physical pain and so forth. If we cut ourselves or trap our finger in the door, that is dukkha. But dukkha has a much wider and more subtler meaning. It means emotional pain, but it also means, on a very ordinary level, the feeling that something is missing, the feeling of a lack. Here in the midriff, here in the middle, in the pit of our stomachs, we feel that there is something is missing. And this is something that's important when we're looking at desires, when I want something. Whenever I feel myself overcome by a wanting or a not wanting, wanting and not wanting are simply two versions of the same thing, then if we look underneath that, that has to be predicated on somehow a perception that something is lacking, something is missing. Because if nothing is missing, then rather like the full man who's eaten a good meal, hunger is completely banished. In the one who has drunk her fill, thirst is banished. And so it is that if there is no lack, then there is no desire. So those two things are very much together. Now, of course, if we don't eat and we don't drink, then hunger and thirst guide us to take the necessary action to survive, and no one is speaking against that. However, there are many things that the mind concocts and that the mind creates out of itself for one reason or another. And these things are called the sticky attachments, the reasons that these things arise. And they take us over from time to time. And this is something that we see in our behavior. If I am going through a difficult patch, quite often a desire will arise almost out of the blue to satisfy myself in some way. I remember my own teacher of Myokyo-ni telling the story of someone she knew in the early days of the Buddhist Society. And he was a Londoner, and he was going through a bit of a sort of depressing period of his life. And he confided to her one day that he had woken up and he'd had an overwhelming urge to go and have an ice cream in Battersea Park on the South Bank. And this was something that he did as a young boy. His father used to take him to the park, and there he would treat him, and he would have an ice cream from the ice cream stand there. And he remembered that memory when it came up. He was extremely fond of it. He remembered it with great fulfillment and satisfaction and contentment, and he remembered that time as a time of being really content. And so he went back to Battersea Park and found an ice cream seller and bought an ice cream, and he stood there and ate the ice cream, and he was unfortunately just as miserable after having eaten the ice cream as he had been before. The magic just didn't work. Things had moved on, and but it's an interesting point, and this is the reason why Myokyo-ni retold this incident, because we often attach circumstances with these feelings of contentment. We look back fondly with a sort of nostalgic tinge to some time in our youth. But to be perfectly honest, if we went up to the attic and we took out some of our old games and toys that we had when we were children, could I honestly feel the same now as I did then? Well, maybe we should try it. See, it's not quite the same. What we usually have is a powerful memory that comes up. But if we remembered as a child, we could have a toy and we could play with it for hours, and be fully engrossed, fully given in to that play. And because of I am fully given in and fully given away into the playing and have become at one with the playing, this is the samadhi, then of course the heart is released from the yearnings of I and the wantings and the not wanting of I. I get completely forgotten in that given in state, and therefore contentment naturally arises as a consequence of that. But my judgments as an adult don't usually permit me to do that. And in our practice, therefore, what we are learning to do is not just to tie that ability to give myself wholeheartedly and thus attain the samadhi of what at this moment is being done, just to one or two things, one or two favourite things, pastimes and so forth, which, let's face it, is pretty easy if it's something that I like, but to all circumstances. And this is why we come back to the good old mundane daily life practice, where all the circumstances are grist to the mill. And this is such a useful way to approach it. This is why daily life practice, although in itself is a concoction, is so useful, because it depersonalizes it. how I feel about what is to be done right now. Oh, the ironing. Oh, I've got to do the dusting and the hoovering, and that feeling of leaden dread sinks on me. These are all my feelings. These are nothing but my feelings, and that is all they are. There's nothing more than that either. There's no substance to them except my own memory, my own judgment, the mental formations, the samskaras, if we want to use the terminology from the five skandhas. These are the samskaras. They've simply come into being. And the energy of life, the virya, which has now been transformed into this sluggish, leaden pudding that really doesn't want to bestir himself to go and do anything. If I just plunge right into that whole leaden pudding feeling and in one go swallow it right down, and then take that energy and, before thinking of anything, before making any more judgments or any more ruminations about anything, simply jump right into what at this moment is to be done. And remarkably, in that jumping, suddenly that same energy that had been that leaden, sluggish slop now becomes vital, becomes active, becomes one-pointed, and my goodness, if I really put myself into it, it seems to just go of itself. And quite literally it goes of itself, because in that samadhi it means there is just that oneness with what at this moment is being done. And as it says in the Mahayana Sutras, the heart rolls with the 10,000 things, and that rolling, which is the same as that flowing, that rolling is truly mysterious. Well, it is. It's a mystery to I, because there's no I there anymore to even sit back and look at it. It's completely at one. So this is really what he's pointing to when he says, if you know that fundamentally there is nothing to seek. That's not to say that there's nothing to be done. Master Rinzai, in his short life, was extremely busy. He was teaching and running a monastery, and at those times those Chinese monasteries had 800 to 1,000 students in them, plus all the public duties he will have had as being Lord High Abbot is a high status position in society too. So there's no question that there was plenty to be done, but there was nothing to seek, nothing further to seek. This is something that I often don't quite understand. I think that unless I am seeking something, then quite literally I turn to stone, but this is not the case. If we look out into the universe, which we are told is about 13.8 billion years at the last count, what has it been seeking? Has it been working to a plan? Well, I know some believe that everything is according to a plan, but actually in Buddhism and certainly Mahayana Buddhism is based on wu-wei, which is that non-intentional activity, that things come to be simply because it's their nature in their time and season to do so, and that this coming to be and ceasing to be, this wu-wei, is a deep, deep mystery in and of itself, and that it needs no purpose. It doesn't need horns on the hare or legs on the snake. It doesn't need extra little twiddly bits added by my wishes, etc. It is simply immanent and magnificent and profound, exactly as it is, and incomprehensible. Truly incomprehensible. This is not to say that we can't understand things about it. Yes, we do. But in and of itself, what it is in itself, what I am in myself, what this body is in myself, what this feeling and thought is in and of its own nature, is pretty much a mystery, because we are carried away by the outer appearances of things. And this is what we become attached to, those outer appearances, without really understanding the inner nature. This is very much in the Mahayana vein. And so Master Rinzai goes on and diagnoses the case. But because you have little faith, you run about agitatedly, seeking your head, which you think you have lost. So because you have little faith, now how does that faith come into it? Well, here now we go back and we remember that the old masters always used to say that there were three fundamental requirements for the practice of Zen. The first one was a great root of faith. The second, a great ball of doubt. And the third one was a fierce determination to see the whole work through. Now that great root of faith is indeed that great root of faith in the inner Buddha nature, and that the Buddha nature can be realized. This reflects what the Buddha said in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. That's the Mahayana Sutra, upon his awakening, which we had last month, of course, when he said how wonderful, how miraculous all beings, but all beings are fully endowed with the wisdom and power of the Buddha nature. And yet, because of their sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of it. And it's those sticky attachments which simply prevent the realization of the Buddha nature of this own fathom-long body. Exactly as it is. No change is necessary. Exactly as it is. But, of course, when I look at it, I see a lack. I think, oh, it would be perfect. But, I've put on a few pounds over Christmas, and I don't want to look like this when it comes to the summer months, and I'm on the beach, and I have those presents that were given, and I don't know where I'm going to put them. I wonder if I give them, maybe I can save them and give them away to people at birthdays over the years, but if I give them away, will the person who gave them to me, will they find out, and then what will they think of me? And if we really look at the sorts of things I think about during the day, and this is a useful exercise to do as well. No need to banish thoughts, but just notice the nature of them. What are they based around? What sort of things are they going on about? Is there something about this feeling of a lack in them, that it's never quite right? It's almost, but yes, this is just where I need to be. Again, I remember Myokyo-ni saying that she only ever studied Zen so that she could perfect her laziness, and she gave an example that she, in the summer months when she would put out a sunbed and she would go and lie down thinking to spend a short time having a rest in the sun, and she would lie down and she would look over, and there in the garden she would spot a weed, and it would just irritate her, and so she'd have to get up and she'd have to kneel down and pull that weed out, and as she was getting up again she would spot another one, and so she would have to pull that out, and then a third, and by the time she got to the fifth or the sixth, she had gone and got a pannier and a little trowel, and she was now busy gardening because she couldn't just let it go. And these are these things that they capture me, don't they? Whether it's an idea or a circumstance, it just annoys me too much. I have to, and this is that compulsion. This is why at the end of this, Master Rinzai says, you cannot stop yourself. And it's true, I cannot stop myself. I often think, life would be so much better if only I didn't do this. Life would be so much easier if only I didn't feel compelled to do that. What we don't recognize is that this compulsion is I. And so our practice is this giving up of I, this laying down of I. There's no way that nothing further to seek is something that can be attained by I. It's mutually exclusive on those things. It's something we don't appreciate. So that I really has to be laid down. Going back to that little child who's playing tirelessly with those toys. They are so, and indeed they, in their own way, they also capture him, they enchant him too, but in that enchantment he is completely given in and therefore given away, and so time passes, everything passes, and doesn't even realize it. He had a fight with his sister, or he got told off because he was moaning because he couldn't have those sweets and was making a big hoo-ha, but all that is forgotten in that play. Now we are not children, and it wouldn't be appropriate to sit down with our favourite toy and just do this one thing and think, well, this is going to solve all my problems. It wouldn't do. It would create a huge ruckus. Our family wouldn't like it. We'd probably lose our job as well if we didn't bother to turn up, or if we did and didn't bother doing any work because it doesn't suit me. So we have to universalize this ability to be able to play in all circumstances. And in that playing, it really means, therefore, to give myself wholeheartedly away into the doing. So, because you have little faith, we were looking at what is that little faith? That little faith really is in the faith of the power of the Buddha nature, and in our practice too, because our practice, our daily life practice itself, becomes the means of realizing the Buddha nature. And that which leads beings to the realization of the Buddha nature, and therefore liberation from the causes of suffering, is what's called the great Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva. So rather than trusting to the practice, rather than just really giving myself wholeheartedly into the daily life practice, I still plan, I still plot, I still connive, I still worry and become anxious as a result of that plotting and conniving, of course, because what happens if I don't attain it? And what's at the bottom of that plotting and planning? Well, there is a must-have, or cannot stand, or how it ought to be. This is the other thing when I like to generalize my wants and turn them into moral statements usually. But they're morally good for me, of course, not necessarily for everyone. But because you have little faith, and it is this faith that is therefore also necessary. This is why that great root of faith is really important, because when the going gets tough, and in the practice it does get tough sometimes with the emotional onslaught, etc., then I want to give up, and I don't want to do it anymore. And it's at these moments really that great root of faith has to take over and has to put one foot in front of the other now. And it's this great faith that carries as well. And this great faith is also shown, and has to be shown, in the teaching of the three refuges, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. That when we're in trouble, we go for refuge and support, therefore, to those three refuges, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and why we chant those three refuges in the morning, and that too is a useful practice, just to remind ourselves that when we are in trouble, that we can go to the Buddha as an example, we can go to his teachings to get some inkling of how now to face this situation, and we can also partake as well in the temple life with at our Dharma Center or Buddhist Society and so forth, and we can be with like-minded people who will help us and provide support with us, and we can talk to them and they with us too. And in that there's a mutuality, and in fact there's some useful lessons in there as well. Perhaps one of the most important ones is that when I do have my own difficulties, I always feel that they're unique to me. The benefit of sharing difficulties is to realize that actually this is our common human lot, and it really helps put them into perspective. That feeling of I is exacerbated when I'm in pain and suffering. I mean, I really can't stand it, and there I am. And it's not just a matter of saying, oh well, now I shall lay myself down. Sometimes I really cannot, and that is when we also need some support from others as well. I know many people who really enjoy going to a meditation group, with sitting with others, say once a week. They find it's really useful, particularly if they're having difficulty with the meditation, because with the zazen, because one doesn't want to, even if it's a little bit of pride, one doesn't want to sort of get up and walk out halfway through a sitting. So one perseveres, and in that persevering one discovers the inner strength that is quite naturally there too. So these are the things that we have to rediscover through faith. In the beginning we have to have faith, but real faith is created through repetition, through the discovery that in fact something can be trusted. The Buddha's teachings can be trusted, and the daily life practice can be trusted as well. And when things are difficult, that is not a time to abandon the teachings or the practice. Quite the reverse. It's the time to double up the effort, because the teachings and the practice are that support, are those refuges that will help us get through those difficulties. So we'll leave it there for now. There's a lot in that of small saying of Master Rinzai, and no doubt we'll be coming back to Master Rinzai in subsequent talks also. But for now, we'll leave it there.